path of Ondoy and Pepeng, there is an urgent task of reconstructing calamity areas. Ondoy and Pepeng altered not only the landscape of the places they visited, but also the spending contours for the next year. The back-to-back typhoons interjected themselves as one macroeconomic assumption that must be reckoned with. Ondoy and Pepeng are names of the two elephants in our living room that we can't just ignore. There will be budgetary adjustments to respond to urgent needs, but the superstructure for the 2010 budget remains. The overarching theme of fiscal consolidation and completion of priority programs of the Arroyo administration also stays. However, a third task beckons: reconstruction. Now, this presentation includes the following: the underlying fiscal program for 2010, major dimensions of the 2010 budget, key allocations in the budget, and reconstruction. Now, before we look at the long and hard road ahead, let us take stock of where we are now. Let me give you a snapshot of our expenditures before the two elephants barged and disturbed our peaceful existence. Total disbursements of the national government for the first 8 months for 2009 amounted to 949.1 billion, equivalent to 63.7% of the full year program of 1.489 billion. Disbursements were 127.3 billion, or 15.5% higher than the recorded amount for the same period in 2008. Disbursements expanded in all of the accounts except for interest payments, net lending, and budget support to government corporations in terms of equity. The increase in disbursements is attributed to infrastructure and other capital outlays, with an increase of 48.8 billion, or 49.4% higher compared with the 98.8 billion incurred for the same period last year, due to front-loading of infrastructure projects this year. Now, out of the 94.3 billion allocated under the national government component of the Economic Resiliency Plan, 87.2 billion, or 92.4%, has been released by mid-year. Of these, 77.2 billion had been obligated, 56 billion for DPWH, 9.9 billion for DOTC, and 11.2 billion for the Department of Agriculture. As validated by NEDA Director General, both government consumption and public construction registered an uptick in the first semester of the year. Now, the fiscal strategy for 2010, as reported, calls for the following: reducing the budget deficit from 3.2% of GDP to 2.8% of GDP, which implies an absolute decline in deficit level. Maintaining the overall revenue effort at 16%, but improving the tax effort of it. In contracting government disbursement as a percentage of GDP from 19.1% to 18.8%, consistent with the deficit reduction program. Now, as percent of GDP, disbursements will slightly decline from 19.1% in 2009 to 18.8% in 2010. Interest payments as a percent of GDP would increase to 4.1% in 2010 from 4% in 2009, while non-interest expenditures will only decline to 14.7% of GDP in 2010. Now, consistent with the target to reduce the budget deficit from 3.2% of GDP to 2.8% in 2010, the proposed 2010 obligation budget is pegged at 1.541 trillion. This represents an increase of 8.1% over the 2009 budget, including interest payments. In real terms, this increase is equivalent to 3.6%. Now, excluding interest payments, in nominal terms, the more productive components of the budget is 2.3% higher than the 2009 budget. In real terms, this implies a 2.2% contraction from the 2009 budget. Now, given this ceiling we had to work with, we adopted a basic allocation policy which considered the absorptive capacity of the agencies in 2008, or their actual performance in 2008, and their performance and their organizational performance indicator framework. Next slide, please. Now, in applying the allocation policies presented earlier, we used the data on unutilized appropriation. For instance, the DPWH has about 25.6 billion still unutilized out of its allotments of 124.4 billion in 2008. And take note, their budget in 2008 was even smaller than 2009. So we used the data to get the optimum level of the 2010 budgets of departments and agencies. Furthermore, the configuration of the budget has also been affected, as can be seen in the next few slides. So as an example, you go back please. As an example, you can see so advocates of having higher budgets for the department should also take a look first at their absorptive capacities, because these amounts end up not being used at all for the fiscal year. Next slide, please. Now, again, as a result of the allocation policies and data cited earlier, capital outlays will decline by 15.8% from the 2009 level. However, COE will grow by 13.8% of GDP in 2010 as compared to the 2009 level of 1.1 trillion. Now, by sector, consistent with the government's thrust to achieve medium MDGs and alleviate poverty, the social sector corners the biggest share of the budget with 31.1% or 479.9 billion, followed by economic services with 23%, debt burden 23.1%, general public services 17.9%, and defense with 4.8%. Now, starting January, the DBM laid down a new policy of use it or lose it on cash allocations to ensure that funds do not lie idle in banks and are used judiciously to speed up the implementation of vital projects. The new policy requires government agencies to fully use the funds that are released to them for the month. Otherwise, the unspent funds will lapse. The former practice was these funds would accumulate in the accounts of these departments. Now, after the end of every month, it lapses. Now, the use it or lose it policy spurred higher cash utilization rates by agencies. Utilization rate jumped to 96.8% in the first 9 months of the year compared to 93.7% last year. Unutilized